Hello and welcome. In this session, we're going to look at selecting online materials for the use in the classroom. I'm Chad Heck. I am the school librarian at Pike High School in Indianapolis, Indiana, and thanks for joining me at Keep Indiana Learning. My background is in school librarianship, but I'm also a licensed attorney. Note that none of the advice given in this should be construed as legal advice, and you should definitely consult your school attorneys when dealing with the legal elements of these matters. Let me go ahead and move on, and let's talk about how to select these programs and tools. So there's a million resources on the web, and looking at the privacy policy and looking at the use policy, terms of use for each of those services is time consuming. So the best solution is to go deep into the tools that you adopt and not wide. Don't look at everything that's out there. Look at the stuff that you have and that you've gone over and you've vetted thoroughly and really explore how to use those tools well. Um, I I hope that everyone knows this by now who've used internet resources, but free isn't always free. Um, these companies have to make money. They're making money often on selling user data, and many of them try this drug dealer model where they give you a little piece of it for free and then hope that it hooks you and gets you to pay for their paid plans and models. So that's the freemium way of doing business on these resources. So that's one way that they make money is they hook you with the free and hope that you'll pay money to subscribe to something more. But for the bulk of this presentation, I'm going to talk about student privacy. Student privacy is covered in the law under COPA and FERPA. We're primarily going to talk about COPA today. FERPA is about educational records and and making sure that people don't have access to educational records. It's an important law. It definitely applies to most technology things, but often if you're not sharing educational records online, FERPA won't be an issue. Of course, it brings up the question is what's an educational record, and that gets really complicated too. But COPA is what is all about protecting student privacy online. And we're going to start by looking at a few privacy policies and what my advice is when you're taking a look, when you're starting to do an audit of these policies, what to look for. So we're going to look at the Flippity policy first. And I like Flippity's privacy policy because it's easy. You can read it. It's not using legalese. Basically, Flippity says we're not going to store user data. We're not going to sell user data. We're not going to keep any user data at all on our servers. So this is what we like to see when we're looking at privacy policies. They're simple, they're easy. These are also really unusual. So while Flippity has a great, easy to read policy, we don't see things like this often. More often, we will see things like this Flipgrid policy. Let's open up Flipgrid. And you can see it is, it's long, it's complicated. Someone in your organization should probably read through all of this information before you've agreed to it, but let me just show you some tricks for how to determine things very quickly on one of these privacy policies. And Control F is what I would recommend doing. And if you search for the number 13 in these privacy policies, that's a magic number because that's the number where COPA comes into effect. If they are saying that users can't use the service if they're under 13, then that's a red flag right there. So on Flipgrid, when I search for 13, it does start telling us what the terms are for those students under 13, and often that's going to require parental consent. There are some rules that teachers could act in loco parentis and give that consent in COPA, but it depends on how conservative you want to be in your school organization as to whether or not teachers can make that decision, or if you want that consent from the parents before you start using these services. That's what I would recommend, getting parental consent anytime you're using student information on a third-party service. So that's doing that Control F and looking for 13, or in many of them, if you search for COPA, that will also be a red flag. It'll take you right to the information you need to look at about student privacy. Let's look at a couple more privacy policies. Google for Education is interesting, or whatever they're branding themselves as now. They have a lot of information on privacy in their online privacy center. If you do that Control F and search for COPA, it'll immediately take you to a place where you can learn more about where they are with COPA and their compliance with these privacy protections. But one word of caution about Google for Education in particular is that not all of their services are in Google for Education. So some things may not be covered under this privacy policy, because even though they're a Google product and we use them in our classrooms, they may not be covered under the Google for Education policy and not COPA compliant. We were recently doing an in-depth look at Google Earth and what the compliance is on that, and found that it was not covered under the general Google for Education privacy policy. So you do your own investigation in that area, but Google's an interesting creature because we all use it, and we have to really evaluate different elements of that product differently. Let me go back. Let's look at Canva, one of my favorite tools. So here's Canva's terms of use. If you're not familiar with Canva, it's a image editing and like publication design tool. My teachers love it. They use it all the time, especially when designing things for our learning management system and making them look attractive, and that online presence very user-friendly for our students. Canva is something that my teachers use all the time. And they wanted to use it with their students in the classroom. I pulled up this terms of use, which includes their privacy policy. If I do a Control F and look for COPA, I don't find anything. But if I do that magic 13 number, it says very clearly on here, you must be 13 years or older to use or access the service. And then of course you could use your in loco parentis powers, as I talked about before, or whatever your district policy is on who can give consent for students to use these services. But this is one that requires consent to use. So that brings up another question. There is this whole idea that you need to be 13 in order to use these services. And the question is, what about high school students? Should we use these? They're not covered by COPA. Most high school students are older than 13, and should they be allowed to use this? And of course, you'll want to adopt your own policy on this. I think that if you do a very informative lesson and as part of your digital citizenship, talk about privacy with your students, then having them make that decision to use this in the classroom is, I think, acceptable. They'll always have alternatives to that for those who don't want to give up their information to these third parties. I don't require students to use services online that they are giving up their personal information. But it's something to think about as you adopt your policies in these areas. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'm running out of time, is student data privacy agreements. When you're doing your privacy audit, you can use this resource to give to a company that you're contracting with for online content. And this basically is just a sample writer. Again, I would run it by your own legal department before you use any of these legal resources. This is a student data privacy agreement that could be an addendum to a contract that you have with a provider. And if we look, one thing I really like about this is if you look at Exhibit B in this, it has a check system and it asks them exactly what student information they are using in their online system. So that's a tool that you can use. And I think it's a really good one, but you can find this whole student data privacy agreement. There are multiple samples. This particular one is from Access for Learning, and I really like it. So have a look at that. And this has been a very quick overview of privacy and what to look for. Thanks for paying attention. Visit keepindianalearning.org. My contact information is, you can find me on Twitter at fortheloveofheck, and my email address is caheck@pike.k12.in.us. Thanks a lot.